This is Talking Sense with Dollar Bill. I'm David, Common Sense. Complicated issues like business operations and taxes require complex explanations. Talking Sense with Dollar Bill will explain these issues in plain language and have fun doing it. We must disclose that all opinions expressed on the show are of the hosts, and we advise that you consult a tax professional or attorney regarding any financial or business decisions. We always encourage your questions. Email them to us at info@talkingsensewithdollarbill.com. That's sense with a C. And now, without any further ado, I give you your host, Dollar Bill.
Welcome to the program, and we have a continuation of our last week program. We're looking forward to further explanations as far as the feasibility studies and resource evaluation of items to look at when you're trying to secure land development or property in a normal way.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show, and thank you, everybody, for listening. It's great to be here with all of you, and it's great to be here with you too, Dollar Bill, as always. And as you mentioned, Dollar Bill, it's part 2 of a 2-part episode on land use and feasibility studies. And we're so happy to have with us once again Tom Shepstone of Shepstone Management Company, Inc., based here in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, a real expert in the field. And we're so glad to be here with you, Tom. Thank you for joining us for the show.
Well, it's my pleasure, of course, and I'm just happy you were approved enough of the first show you invited me back, so.
Well, we're interested in assessing resources, and there is a company, Robert Morris, that I think you and I are relatively familiar with, that provides data, and I'd like you to expand on that issue.
Yeah, the resources that you use for doing feasibility work or assessing a property for development, among those is the what used to be called the Robert Morris Associates, RMA, annual statement studies. And I first became acquainted with it in a report I did for feasibility analysis for a USDA loan for what is now the Roboto Nursing Home out in Lake Ariel. It's been there 40 years, I think, or so. So I was involved in that at the very beginning, and they secured USDA loan financing for that. And one of the things we were asked to provide was the Robert Morris data. And we said, Robert Morris, what's that? Yeah. And they explained, well, most banks subscribe to these annual statement studies. So sure enough, I checked with a local bank here in Honesdale, and yeah, we subscribe to that. I said, could I borrow your copy? This is in the days before we had internet or, digital access to information. And so I borrowed a copy, and lo and behold, there you look under the category of nursing homes, and here's the annual statement studies that are collected from nursing homes all over the country of different sizes and for different years, maybe the last 3 or 4 years. And so what we did is we compared the ratios, the financial ratios, and for those other nursing homes with what we were proposing. And that's what the USDA was looking for. And that's what any bank looks for, of course, is how do your projections compare to what the standard for the industry is. And that's one of the resources. A lot of people aren't aware of it. It's now called the Risk Management Association. So it's still RMA. But and it costs quite a bit to subscribe to it, but what I do is I just purchase the information for each business when I'm involved in something. And one of the things I do a fair amount of recently, or have done recently, is meat processing studies, because there is a demand out there for a lot more meat processing. We had some shortages during the whole COVID thing that, of course, the federal government had to respond with billions of dollars, of loans and grants, as they always do. And they come up with a program. It's called, Meat Poultry Expansion Project Program or something like that. So it's got a long acronym. And so they are still funding projects, and I'm involved in one right now in New York State. So one of the things we will do is look at what the party is saying they're going to be able to accomplish, and we're going to compare it to that data, and then that'll be part of our report. And then I will look to their accountants, and again, I will go to a dollar bill that they employ, and he or she will tell me how they think it compares, and maybe adjust their figures or maybe build new figures based on this. That's how it works. So I kind of depend on I generate some of the initial data as to feasibility, and then the accountant comes up and does the pro formas.
Yeah, and those issues that the accountant's going to look at generally need to be explained to the USDA or the bank or whoever is involved as to why any discrepancy from what the national or the regional studies that have presented are not necessarily as reasonable as one might think.
Yes, exactly. Good point. And again, I don't pretend to be an accountant, so I just kind of look at it from a feasibility perspective, and then I turn it over to the accountant to produce the performance.
Where that we've talked about before, the teamwork.
Yeah, that's right.
Comes into play in realizing that access and that information that took substantial time to accumulate and evaluate is getting further enhancement by individuals who have some insight as to the particular region or the particular area or the seasonality, or there's just a whole array of issues that will enhance the likelihood that the projection is going to be accurate within a certain range and is likely to happen. Many years ago, when they were selling different types of investment products, you could buy a seat on a 747 and get an investment tax credit, and it was tax shelters is what they were called at the time.
Right.
And I had the opportunity to evaluate quite a few of those, and most of them, there was an 80 or 90 page document that was presented by the attorneys, and about 79 pages would tell you why you shouldn't do this, and then one sentence would say, more likely than not, it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. I in my history, I had done a fair amount of work in the railroad business, purely by coincidence, but had an opportunity at one point to do something. I actually owned a locomotive at one point, so and then leased it back to the company and so on. So that kind of thing was common back then, and not so common today. But there are other resources too. We live in a world today where the access to resources is just so much different than when you and I first met.
Oh, it's so much better in terms of the challenge is making sure that whatever resource we're using is reputable and reliable and right. It isn't necessarily how much as it is how reasonable the information that you're looking at.
Well, there's companies out there, ESRI, again, the one I talked about for demographic information. Well, they'll also tell you it's still considered demographic, but it's really to another level. I can go in with my subscription that I have to their service. I can look at how much money is being spent on hamburger, for example, in any county, and how that compares to expenditures on hamburger in all the other counties in the country. And I can draw an area around it, and I can look at each county, and I can look at it from the standpoint of the absolute value, the relative value. I can tell you anything about spending on hamburgers, okay, by county. So
that intrigues me from a different perspective, because being an accountant, the first thing I thought of when you talked about the hamburger, can you imagine how many hamburgers? Because every one of them is subject to sales tax. And I'm thinking to myself, how many millions and hundreds of millions of dollars are generated from sales tax off of hamburgers?
Yeah. And what happens is with this data, and the data is also with the SRI, they provide geographic information. So they were the ones that really kind of, I don't want to say invented, but really promulgated the geographic information systems, which is where you have all your soils data, your floodplain data, your topographical data that we talked about in the last program, all and a lot more is all digitized, and now it can be combined into one map. Back in again when we met, there was a book out at that time by a professor from University of Pennsylvania called Ian McHarg, a very famous book for planners called Design with Nature, and in it he basically, this is pre-digital now. He had maps of all sorts of things from the Philadelphia suburban area, and he would overlay them, and then show you after you take away the floodplains and the bad soils and the wetlands and whatever, this is what you're left with. And it could be demographic factors too. It could be, housing values, for example. And so he pioneered that concept of overlapping maps. But it was very difficult to do then, and now it's easily done. It's done all the time, and it's done to great depth. And one of the problems we have today, and I think it's going to be a problem with AI too, and AI is very scary in many respects, and also very welcoming in other respects, But one of the problems we have is that we're at now, and I'm sure, Bill, you've experienced this too, is too much data. You have to sort through what's really important. I mean, I can write a 100-page report on anything.
So,
but
discussion.
It may be 98 pages of it aren't important, So you have to focus in on what's really important at the time to the party. Is it somebody that wants to buy a piece of land to develop multifamily housing? Well, there's only certain things that count.
And it's very specific in terms of
Yeah.
what you should be assessing, and the process, whether it's in the accounting or no matter what professional area you're in, being able to discern the difference
Yeah.
between what's relevant and what's irrelevant.
Absolutely.
Our resources that we use to evaluate or provide information to our clients is so important, and being able to have the ability to identify that which is relevant and that which is irrelevant, which was our most important aspect that we try to minimize when we spend time on irrelevant information. We certainly don't want to have to provide that to an individual, because that which is important is the issue that we're trying to deal with.
This is one of the problems with government, too, is when government produces reports, it tends to include a lot of extraneous information. So when you are reading something the government has produced, you need to have a skill for looking through it and determining what's really critical to what you're looking at, and that's not always easy.
And the attorneys generally have prescribed procedures or things that are in contractual nature, and whether it's establishing subordination, which, believe me, I'm not even sure what that means. But the bottom line is that attorneys know these specific categories and what they are supposed to do, and so they can review a document a whole lot faster than an individual who's not as familiar and doesn't have the background.
Right, and let me point out something else, Bill, and that is, periodically government's in the business of pushing out grants and loans. We're in one of those periods now, and that's going to come to an end. It did when Reagan came in. It came into an end for 10 years or so, and then it gradually came back, and now they're pushing it out all over the place. And it'll have to end. But right now, you have that opening that's available, and a lot of people think, well, we got to pursue these grants, we got to do this, we got to do that. My philosophy, quite honestly, is if it's worth doing, you don't need a grant to do it. So, but be that as it may, when you're preparing a grant application, a skilled grants person understands the secret to getting that grant, which is twofold. One is regurgitating what the grant applicant tells you they're looking for, and secondly, and I think more importantly, is don't give more information than is requested. Okay, so I learned that very early on. This was back in 1974, believe it or not. 1974, I was working with a municipality, and we put together started drafting a grant application. And I was a young kid. I was writing voluminously and making my case. I was very passionate about it. And then we hired a guy that had a lot of experience in to come in and look at it. He says, "Oh no, this is all wrong." So my ego was flattened just like that, But he was 100% right. You never give more than is requested, and that's kind of the reverse side of what we've been talking here.
Yeah, and the magnificent thing about that is that if you need to resolve an issue, understand the issue and don't create a new one.
Yes. That's a very common thing, particularly when you look at land use feasibility studies and you're trying to resolve a zoning issue. Maybe you've got a sales agreement and it's contingent upon getting a zoning permit, okay? There are some very good zoning attorneys out there, really superb. But sometimes they create more problems than just what you said. They may create a problem. And I have a friend who's a very skilled land use attorney, and I only recommend him for certain situations because there's in the Yiddish world, there's a term for a fellow who gets in there and boasts and makes a new problem, and that's a balgavi. So there's a lot of balgavis in the legal world, so you have to be careful. Again, when you're hiring expertise, you get somebody that's focused on the job at hand. What you just said, Bill. So.
And to that extent, when you're identifying, like I say, a specific issue or a specific problem, don't enhance the way you address it simply because you know more. Just answer the question.
It's so true. And you as a borough councilman, I'm sure you deal with that a lot. You'll have people before you who explain too much. You just need to know certain factors, certain things.
At the same time, when you're dealing with a circumstance like that, trying to involve the community is pulling nails out of tough wood there, because it gets really tough to get participation in a functional and an understanding process where the individuals might say, well, I want it this way, and right. I can respect the desire, but I don't necessarily understand what it is you think we can do just because you want us to.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the problems that we have today, and this goes right back to the feasibility analysis, when you are talking about evaluating the possibility of a project, people just don't anticipate NIMBY opposition. Not in my backyard. They don't anticipate that. And I have a very good friend who's in the consulting business, and we were on the phone this morning, as a matter of fact, and we were talking about the fact that a client that we have, a mutual client, is just very naive about the NIMBY opposition that's going to be come up against their project. And quite honestly, people like planners, myself, are responsible for some of that, because what we've done is we've kind of told the world that they have a right to have an opinion on every project, every little thing that goes on. And we send out one of my pet peeves is we're not required, I should say, under Pennsylvania municipal law to notify people when there's a project next to them, where there's a requirement that the public hearing be advertised in the paper. But not everyone, but almost every municipality in both New York and Pennsylvania that I ever work with also requires you notify all the neighbors within 500 feet or something. Now that sounds like a great idea, right? It sounds like it's fair. But the reality is what it does is it does two bad things. One is it tells the person that's getting this, it tells them something's going on and they better be scared, which is not good. The second is that it encourages them, once they learn how it works, to come and suppose that they actually have a say. Now, the say was taken care of when the law was passed, okay? So you as a borough councilman, for example, when you enact a zoning amendment, and you and I have worked together on some of those, that's when the say occurs.
Right.
And once the law is in place, the public really doesn't have a lot of say other than to bring a problem to the public's or to the decision maker's attention. But if you go to a zoning hearing on a controversial project, you will find people coming out and saying, "We don't want it, and we don't have to give a reason why. We just don't want it, and you better turn it down." So this is something that it's a situation we've created, I think. But in any case, the person that's planning a new project needs to be aware of this. This is part of you've got to get over that naivete about thinking that you just go in and present it, and if you explain it well enough, people will buy it. No, that's not the way it works.
No, unfortunately, conflict is not unusual.
Yeah. But there is a lot of naivete on the part of developers, and who, again, going back to what we discussed at the last program, A lot of them are very optimistic. That's why they're successful. That's why they're good at what they do. But at the same time, they can often be naive about
Well, you mentioned the
opposition.
NIMBY, and of course, as I look at trying to deal with the stormwater issues that I've raised before, one of the means of minimizing the problems when you're dealing with stormwater is creating retention ponds. And the problem is, who in the area is going to be willing to sacrifice their backyard or their property to allow a retention pond to be created in that particular area if it seems like an appropriate process?
Is your employee manual outdated? Need help recruiting or handling employee concerns? Harvest Inc. is here for you. We offer customized HR packages for your business. Right now, you can claim 60 minutes of complimentary workplace HR consulting. No sales pitch, no strings. Visit us at harvestinc.com. Our specialists listen to your concerns and implement HR best practices. Harvest Inc. Affordable, reliable, accountable. We make workplaces better. Call us 570-542-5330.
And now back to our conversation with Tom Shepstone.
And Tom, you had some thoughts in mind.
You brought up a very interesting topic, and that is if you're doing stormwater planning in a community or with a project, how do you provide for retention ponds or other improvements to deal with stormwater? It could be swales, for example. And there are ways to do it. An engineer can solve any problem, okay? We know that. Engineers can solve any problem. Going back to the feasibility side of this thing, if you're looking to develop a property, let's say you're going to develop a 20-acre property into 10 home sites of 2 acres each, okay? That's going to probably require a little road, a stub road with a cul-de-sac. You're going to have to put in some stormwater improvements. There's going to be a combination of swales. It's probably going to be a detention basin. It could be something else, but there's going to be something, okay? And it would most commonly be a combination of swales and a pond. So it's easy to understand that you've got to provide for that as part of the design, because that's in the regulations. What may not be in the regulations is the community is going to immediately think when they see that, who's going to maintain that? Who is responsible? Now, if the community's on the ball, they're going to insist that the developer create a homeowners association that owns the road and owns the stormwater detention basin and puts up a financial guarantee that it's going to be maintained, because they have to be cleaned out from time to time. And then you have the swales that run through the lots, individual lots, and those are going to have to be maintained by the homeowners, and that's going to have to be in their covenants and restrictions. And again, most people who are going to be developing a small project like that are just not aware that all that has to be done. That's part of feasibility's understanding. That's what you're going to have to deal with because it's part of our new world. And the reasons for it are obvious. We don't want to have flooding. Okay.
At the same time, the community itself is trying to develop, or the developer himself is not so interested in just the dollar value. He wants people to want to be there.
Correct.
And so putting the lines in the right spot, the streets in the right spot, the sidewalks, if sidewalks are even required.
Correct. That's another interesting issue.
And curbing, and all of these issues have to be predetermined when you're looking at the development of a particular residential and or commercial site. These sites are usually generated by a large group of people. It's not just one person behind it. But even when that happens, that process of getting the permits and understanding the duration, because it may be a couple of years rather than a couple of months. However, there are some events, once the ball gets rolling in the right direction and they've done all the proper feasibility and planning opportunities, it's amazing how quickly the events can actually get constructed.
Yeah, and the important thing, and again, it goes back to what we've been talking about the last program and this one, which is you've got to think ahead, you've got to plan, you've got to have some experts on your team that can tell you this is what to expect. You know, Honesdale Borough is going to, or any other municipality, is going to require you to deal with stormwater, and you're going to have to deal with that in X, Y, or Z manner, and that's going to be part of the costs that need to be worked into your cost of the lots or the cost of the homes that you're selling.
And some of the other factors is if you don't pay attention to those things before it becomes an absolute requirement, because there are differences in the level of communities. If you have one that's a city and one that's a borough and you have population issues, you may not have as many requirements because there's what's called, I believe it's an MP4, when you get involved in sanitation and sewers and all of that type of stuff. If you're in an area like that, suddenly your requirements and the demands on what you have to do in order to comply, the values or the costs get substantially higher.
Correct. And that's where a lot of people get in trouble. They do not understand this stuff up front, and then they get in a crisis situation, and they're trying to push the municipality to get an approval. The municipality is resisting because it's not quite done right. And that's, again, part of the whole question of how do you do a land use project? How do you do a business for that?
And any building activity, unfortunately, we've had some issues with the property development in the community, and there's no simple way to approach it other than trying to ensure that whatever process is being implemented, there are in fact procedures in place that allow you to actually identify the steps that will allow you to accomplish the mission in a step-by-step process.
And let me just add as a little finality to this, that that's the role of the Planning Commission, in the case of the borough, or sometimes the municipality itself takes that responsibility. But part of the process is educating the person coming before you that this is what we're required to do.
And from that Planning Commission prospect, it really is important that the individuals involved in attempting to accomplish this particular mission understand that cooperating with the Planning Commission is going to help them accomplish their mission sooner.
Amen.
And with that, I'm sure you can hear the music. We're nearing the end of our show, so I want to thank everybody for coming along and listening to the show today. Really want to thank you, Dollar Bill, for your insights. And of course, we want to thank our guest, Tom Shepstone, who's really a titan in the consulting industry and an integral part of our community here in northeastern Pennsylvania. Please check out Shepstone Management Company, Inc. in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. Tom, thanks so much for being with us today.
I can't tell you what a pleasure it's been. Thank you, guys.
And do want to encourage everybody to check us out on Spotify. Go ahead and do a search on Spotify for Talking Sense with Dollar Bill. And you can also check us out at radiobull.com/Talking Sense. And with that, I turn it over to you, Dollar Bill.
And as usual, thank you for listening, and make sure your sense turns into dollars.